Welcome to the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. I'm thrilled you're here. My name is Jason Elkins, and in addition to being your host, I'm also a former U.S. Army paratrooper, third-generation commercial hot air balloon pilot, paramotor pilot, ex-Montana fly fishing guide, advanced open water scuba diver, and a full-time nomad that's visited more than 30 countries on 6 continents. As a seasoned adventure travel expert with a passion for creating and sharing meaningful experiences, I'm on a quest to impact the lives of adventure travelers, the tour operators they rely on, and the communities that host them. Every week, I bring you exclusive interviews with fascinating adventure tourism experts who have agreed to share their personal stories, favorite destinations, and some invaluable travel insights they've picked up along the way. We'll enjoy a casual conversation, create some connections, and likely share some laughs. It's my hope that by the end of each episode, this big world will feel just a bit smaller. Let's get started, shall we? All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. Today, we've got Laura Hagler. Laura is a senior travel specialist with Global Basecamps. I know many of you will recognize the name Global Basecamps. They're a big player and they do a lot of cool stuff, and we're going to learn a little bit about that. And before we learn about that, we're going to learn a little bit more about Laura. Laura, welcome to the show. So happy to have you here.
Happy to be here. Thanks so much.
Yeah, it's when we first spoke, you shared some things with me that I thought were super interesting for our audience, and we're going to touch on those. But let's start with, so you're a senior travel specialist at Global Basecamps. So first thing I want to learn about is, how did you get into that role? So let's start way back at the beginning, however far back you want to go, and just kind of share with us, how did you get from where you were to where you are now?
Oh, it's quite a tale, and it involves Kazakhstani roofers.
Hey.
Fate leads us in strange directions. So I worked on the JET program. I was selected to go on the JET program, which is a Japan exchange and teaching program. And I applied for that after I graduated from university with my art degree, thinking, I don't know what I want to do. I liked Japanese art, so I thought, sure, why not? And I moved there with one word of Japanese under my belt, and it was the word for cat, because my friend happened to name his cat Neko, and so there you had it. So it did not come in handy at first, but I lived there for about 5 years teaching English, and I studied Japanese while I was there and had Japanese local friends that really helped push me to use the language and learn about the culture, and absolutely fell in love with the country, with its people, and met my husband there, who is not as excitingly also American. And we really just have a passion for it. And we traveled all around the country doing road trips and hiking and just exploring. And I came back to the US, and I was actually teaching yoga full time, and started looking for another gig because, sorry, all of you dreaming to teach yoga for a living, it's really tough to make a good living doing it. So I ended up working for a small travel company and worked for them for about a year before they laid everyone off, and was searching online from Manhattan, where I was working temporarily, and found another company that specialized in Japan travel. And I was filling out the application, and I'm like, whoa, this is perfect for me. I know all these things. And they were about to hire me. But I had promised one of my yoga students that I would go and train her new teachers at a studio in Kazakhstan. And the roofers were taking too long to finish the construction of her studio. And so I missed the opening at the first place. And they recommended me to Global Basecamps. And I have been with Global Basecamps ever since. So
wow.
It was a random kind of meandering road that led me here, and I absolutely love it.
And how long have you been with Global Basecamps?
Just over 10 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Now.
Yeah, so that apparently worked out well for you.
Yeah. It was a good fit. It is a good fit.
I'm curious. I'd like to learn a little bit I want to go back a little further if we can.
Sure.
So you graduated school and got a job over in Japan teaching English. Were you doing, that's primarily teaching English was the job? Okay.
Yes.
So when you were in school studying art, you said?
Yes.
Okay. So did you have thoughts of travel, tourism? When did it first, like when did the idea first enter your head that maybe you could actually work in the travel space and really help share it with other people?
Well, I mean, I dreamed of traveling from a really young age because my family didn't really leave the US. We went to Florida every year, and I got to go to New York, which is kind of like as foreign as you can get within the US. And I loved every opportunity of getting away from where I grew up. And I was from the Midwest. No offense, St. Louis is a great town. I love it. I love to go back and visit, but I don't want to live there permanently. Sorry, my sister. So I studied abroad in England, which was inspired by an old soccer coach who did it. And I did that. And then in university, was really jealous when this girl I knew came back from Thailand. And it sounded like the most exotic thing in the world. She was like, oh, and I think it was a Kentucky tour. Not to rag on Kentucky, but like bus tours where everybody kind of hooks up was the old thing back in the day. And she's like, oh, I went on this exotic tour of Thailand and we went to a full moon party. And it's like, whoa, it must have been crazy. College. And then I had this opportunity and I went over there. And what happened was I started arranging trips for other people. So I would take trips and plan out road trips and things in Japan. And it was always so much fun for me. And in university, I headed an organization where I arranged two organizations, one where I arranged an annual trip to Key West to do volunteer work, and one to New York to do art studios and things. And so I kind of knew how to handle groups a little bit in that regard. And it just was a natural step, I guess. I started arranging things for people who came to visit and came home. And yeah, I never thought I would be in sales. And it just fit like a glove, which kind of it surprised me.
That's very cool. So why did you take this on, helping people arrange their trips? What was it about that was rewarding for you? Because you weren't probably getting paid or making a lot of money doing it, right?
So I give off big mom vibes. I am very much like the mother of, I was like the mom of my best friend's fraternity back in the day. I was like, she has everything in her bag that you could need. The snack person, the water person, I have a screwdriver. So I kind of just enjoy planning. I'm not a type A. I'm much more of my desk is chaos, but it makes sense to me type of person. And I really love plans. And I think that perhaps stemmed from my father, who we would go to Florida every year from Missouri. And it was about a 2-day drive. We stopped and he had this list. And this list is like forever lodged in my mind of every place we would stop to get gas, where the cheapest gas was, the places that my mom would eat at when we go to certain restaurants along the route, places that had clean toilets for stopping to use the restaurant, like everything. And then this list of every utensil or like omelet pan, I remember being on and off the list at different times of the things we'd need for a 2-week stay at a condo in Florida. And this list was just perfectly honed over the years to just be everything we'd need. And I was always amazed by his ability to organize things. And I know it does not sound very sexy, but organization and lists they're just absolutely wonderful to me. So I think I just gravitated toward it.
It's interesting because I think perhaps you and other people that work as travel planners or get involved in that, it's a unique skill set or a unique personality mix, because sometimes people that like lists and structure and organization can be we maybe classify them as the cautious analytical types,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not typically the ones that are going to pick up and take a job in Japan or, go travel and go to these exotic places. So it's always interesting to meet somebody that has that interesting mix. Where do you think that part of it comes from, the adventurous part of it? Is that a conflicting thing for you, or has that just been natural too?
I mean, I've always liked things being organized, but I've never liked things to be easy. I've always enjoyed puzzles. So when I see a a list, or if somebody emails me and they say, I want to go to these 5 places, or I want to go, I want to do these 3 or 4 activities while I'm in Japan. This is my bucket list. This is my dream. Or if it's in Myanmar or Iceland or wherever, I get excited. I start putting the pieces together in my head. It's all kind of like a game or a puzzle to me. And I joke with one of my bosses who created our system that we build our itineraries in. He created it for us. So it works. We were the guinea pigs. It's just very natural. And it's a video game to me. So I will look at things and I'll organize everything. And I'm like, oh, did I do my contacts lately? Oh, I got to catch up. And I organize it all. And I don't know how, but in my brain, that's the way it is with these trips and things as well. And when I travel, I've gone through I have to do everything, everything, everything. I've gone and done the lazy trips. I kind of I'm a mixed bag with it, but I also am a collector of sorts. So I like to collect experiences. I like to collect destinations that I've traveled in. And I think for me, it's a puzzle. It's a game. And I think if someone likes games, like board games, video games, anything of that nature, you can kind of abstractly look at trip planning and traveling as well as a game. Like, okay, I am in this place and this thing has occurred to me. How am I going to fix it? Do you choose A or B? Like those choose your own adventure books back in the day. Do you remember those? Loved those. They're always horrible, but I loved them. And this way you're in it, you're like, I'm in the middle of India and I have been bitten by a dog. Do I go to the place and get malaria medication? Do I panic? So yeah, I don't know. That's the way.
I'm curious if like the idea of getting on a plane, flying somewhere, and maybe you've got your first night booked and let's say you're going to be in Asia somewhere for 3 weeks. And as all you have is your first night booked. Does that like freak you out, that idea? Do you have to have it all kind of planned? Or are you able to just show up in a place and say, I'm going to do the first night and then figure it out from there?
Well, hold on, because I think I said malaria when I meant rabies before. So I just correct myself. You don't get malaria from dog bites.
Good for catching that. I heard it, but I wasn't going to call you out.
No, not rabies. Anyways, so I've done it. It wouldn't freak me out if it was a country that I've been in before. Mm-hmm. Like if it was somewhere in Asia that I've traveled before, I wouldn't really have any qualms with it. But there are a lot of factors that you need to know going into that. So if I was an inexperienced traveler and I just booked a flight to, let's say, Thailand, and I didn't know anything about the country, I didn't check the weather, I didn't check any national holidays, you might be in a bit of a pickle, because if you don't know the area, you don't know where you're staying, you don't know any of those details. So for me, yeah, it does kind of seem like traveling with your pants down. But I've also, I've done this. I showed up to the airport a day early and got laughed at by the attendant. And he's like, this has never happened before. You're a day early for your flight.
You didn't tell him.
We're like, oh,
later, did you?
Well, this is before. This was when my husband was living in Thailand like a year after, and I was like, I'm an idiot. But we didn't have anything to do, so we're like, let's just go back where we were, and we can get a room, and if we can't find one there, we'll find one somewhere else. So knowing what I know now, not a problem. I would do it. But there are just too many. Is it Lunar New Year? Is it Songkran? Like, what is happening? Where am I? So yeah, you could do it if you have no standards as far as what you need. I don't mean like.
Well, I was just kind of enjoy that type of travel, and then you said if you don't have any standards, I'm like, okay, I get it.
I mean, like if you have to have air conditioning, if you have to have a private room with an attached bathroom, if you have to be in a walkable distance of sites and restaurants and things, then yeah, it's going to be much, much harder, but it's still doable. And if you want to just have an adventure and go for it, and you don't have kids and you don't have special requirements, you're good. Yeah. But yeah, how many people are completely unabated or unchained by something at this stage in life,
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I enjoy both. I have, like, when I went to Thailand the first time, I was like, okay, I'm going to Chiang Mai. That was pretty much all I knew. And I booked a place for a week, got on the plane, never been to Asia, got on the plane, and then quickly realized, okay, the place I booked was horrible. But I tend to do that. So at least I only booked it for a week instead of a month. And So then it was like the first 2 days there was okay. Now time to find a different place. And of course, I showed up
Yeah.
during smoky season, and it was, the people that I was hoping to engage with weren't really there because anybody that could leave had left. And so that I think about 3 weeks in, I sat down and booked a ticket to Bali for the next day. Of course, with no plans for where I was going to stay in Bali either. So I enjoy that. And yeah, there have been many times I've kind of regretted not having a little bit more of a plan, which is interesting because I've worked as a planner as well and in sales and tour sales. And I would never let my clients go do that.
Yeah. There's a day and an age for it. I think when you're first traveling and you're a backpacker and you're kind of just flying by the seat of your pants, not to just keep referencing pants. We're talking trousers if you have any listeners in other English-speaking countries. Yeah, I mean, I've done it and I've had some really fun experiences because of it, but I've also run into some issues with it. So I feel like the more you know about your destination and at least having a couple of things like a skeleton itinerary in place is significantly safer and better than going in blind. Um, Now, when I went to Japan, I didn't know anything, but I was taken care of by the government because I had an apartment for me and I had a supervisor. And did I have to eat fish as a previous vegetarian and cry when I got to my apartment? Yes, I did. But within a week, I was golden. So it really just depends on the person and their ability to be flexible. And again, like, what are your standards when you travel?
Right.
Like,
I think the flexibility is a key because even if you have the well thought out skeleton itinerary or some sort of plan in place, I've noticed that many of my really good experiences have come from when I've deviated. So, for example,
mm,
just when you're walking down the road to get from point A to point B, and then you look down an alleyway and there's a bunch of people down there. There must be something interesting down there. So you kind of forget about point B for a minute and you go take this, the C, D, E, F route and come back. And I'm always so happy whenever I step away from the itinerary and go do something like that. I find something that I never, ever would have found and you couldn't have planned for it.
yes.
So I mean, I'm
Yes.
sure you've experienced that as well.
Oh God. I mean, the one that just popped into my head, we planned a trip to Thailand and Cambodia. And I was with two of my friends who I lived in Japan with, and one of them lost their passport in Thailand, so they had to stay there. And I went with the other friend to Cambodia, and we were staying in Sihanoukville. And we were on the beach talking and just being friendly. I can make friends with a wall. So my husband's like, calm down and stop making friends. But I was talking to a gentleman who was a professional swimmer and he was from Kansas and I'm from Missouri. So I'm like, hey, neighbor. And we were chatting. And it turns out he and his friend, who were both swimmers, were planning a fundraising event to swim from Sihanoukville's beach out to this island, like a mile or two away. And he was just randomly gathering a boat full of people to kind of root for them and cheer them on from the boat. And he's like, do you guys want to come? So we got invited to go out on this boat. And then we swam the last portion with them. And we ended up staying out on this island. And they forgot about us. And we're like, oh, it's really late. It's getting dark. And so we're on this island and we're sunburnt and we're, still happy. And they picked us up. It's pitch black, but the bioluminescent, was it the plankton were in the water that night? It was magical. And it was all purely because the boat forgot to pick us up. And you end up accumulating so many of these stories because it's like this bizarre thing happened. And I was like, you say yes. You're like, yeah, why not? Let's go do this thing. And yeah, that's part of travel and part of life is just saying yes and not knowing what the hell you're getting yourself into.
This
And it's beautiful.
No, that is so cool. What a great story to share. That's so what I'm taking away from all this is, okay, have a plan in place, but I like to leave some gaps, leave some opportunities.
Yes.
Because you don't want to miss something like that because you've got a dinner reservation that you feel like you have to keep. And then also just that ability to accept that, okay, I have a plan. I have somewhere that I'm quote unquote supposed to be. I've already made a dinner reservation, or I've got a room booked in the next village over. But having that ability to say, you know what? Okay, I've got a room booked the next village over, but there's a place right here. There's something interesting happening here. So let go of that sunk cost idea. Is like, look,
Yes.
I've already paid for that room. I don't want to miss this opportunity because I have a room booked somewhere else. So just that flexibility in traveling, I think is pretty important. Go ahead.
It's mandatory. Like when I build itineraries for my clients, if it is a place that is safe for them to do so, I work in free time for wandering, and I discuss exactly what we're talking about. You need time to just delve into that destination on your own and see what it has to offer you, because we can't plan for everything.
I think that's so cool, because I think sometimes people, having done that type of work for quite a while, people sometimes look and they see a gap in the itinerary and they just think, what, you couldn't come up with anything for me, Jason? You guys are being cheap. You're just like, oh, you got the whole afternoon on your own. Why is that? And when you explain it the way you just did, that's really, really helpful. So I think it's great when anybody listening to this looks at an itinerary, and if it's like hour by hour every day, you might want to question yourself or have a conversation with your planner and say, look, if I were to take some time to go explore and I, forgo some of those planned things, which ones should I drop? Which ones should I skip? And leave yourself some space. That's really cool advice. I'm curious about, so you met your husband in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
He was working there as well. Was he an English teacher as well?
He was. So our prefecture was kind of notorious for couples. I could rattle off probably 8 couples off the top of my head that met there. And there were couples where it was a foreign, like an expat girl and a Japanese guy, or vice versa. But we had I think we had about 90 foreigners teaching in that program there during my first couple of years. And my husband, it was his 3rd year when I was there, my first year, and I was a newbie. And the funny story, and I have a picture of this night, is I had found out like the sad story of he had broken up with his ex-girlfriend and he was bummed. And his friend who was leaving the next day was telling me, and I'm like, oh, that really sucks. And he was just kind of bummed out. I went over to him and I put my arm over his shoulder and I said, you're going to be my best friend. And his first words were like, get away from me, newbie. He likes to bring it up because I clearly knew what I was talking about.
That's funny. And does he still enjoy traveling? Last time we spoke, you'd shared that you as a family have been traveling. So let's touch on that a little bit, because I think that's fascinating.
Yes.
You've got some young children.
I do. They're both homesick today downstairs, being very good, knock on wood. And I have a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old. And this year they have been to 3 countries, not including the US, but one of them's Canada, so it's kind of like cheating. But yeah, I mean, I had these big dreams of traveling a lot with my kids because my parents, they traveled to Florida, which was pretty big for growing up in the Midwest, but they never really traveled internationally. It wasn't something that was done as often, I think, in the middle class back when I was growing up. And I wanted that to be an opportunity that my kids had, particularly since, my husband and I met abroad. And my eldest, we took him to Japan with us when he was 9 months old. And our friends were just like, they were yelling at me, like, bring the baby. They were just gushing over him, and he had a blast because he had everyone fawning over him. And we had a great time with him there, and it was wonderful. And then the pandemic happened, and my youngest was born like in July of 2019. So we'd barely finished, breastfeeding and all that jazz by the time the pandemic ended. And we were supposed to go to Japan that summer. We pushed it another summer. We pushed it another summer. And we're going this summer. So we got an opportunity to go to Indonesia with my company. And we went in spring. Had an amazing time. So the kids got to see Komodo dragons and orangutans, and just my eldest is like, I want to see a dragon. I want to see a dragon. And I trust Asia implicitly. the places that we're going. I know the deep love of kids that they have in all of the cultures. Pretty much any culture loves kids. And it was amazing. It was so good. They did great on the flight. And then the whole time we were there, my young one is like, are we going to the airport? Can we go to the airport? And then we went to Costa Rica in early November for my 7-year-old's birthday. And that was really nice too. So I'm just beyond happy that they can have these experiences. And we've traveled around the US with them as well. Like New York. We lived in Colorado before. We went to Seattle last year, visiting family in different states. So they're pretty well traveled already. So they're accustomed to sitting still for long periods of time if necessary. And I have big hopes for them.
That is so cool. And I recognize that a lot of people, I won't say most, but maybe it's most, that like to travel. They're adventurous. They've been traveling, and then they decide, okay, we're going to start a family, and the traveling thing just stops. Because maybe when they were traveling, they were on an airplane with a screaming baby, and they created this story. I don't want to be that person, so we're not going to travel. And then maybe they go to Disneyland when their kids are, 13 or something like that. And then they tell themselves, well, when the kids move out and go to college, then we'll start traveling again. So what would you say to those listeners?
I would say that kids get accustomed to things the more they do them. And if you start early and you kind of acclimate your children to moving around in different environments and different things, and this doesn't work for everybody. Like I understand that, but test the waters. I mean, my eldest was, I think we were on 10 or 12 flights his first year because we were just like, let's go see this family, this family, this family. And it was just timing wise. Everyone wanted to meet the baby. It was our first, and family lives all over the US. And out of all of those flights, he only had one meltdown, and that was because he couldn't go to sleep. And once he did, he was out cold. So yes, things are going to happen, and you can't prepare for everything. But if you keep putting it off, it takes the back burner in your life. It's just like anything else. If you stop following a passion or a hobby, it kind of just fades away. It's out of sight, out of mind to a point. And I desperately wanted to travel and to have these experiences. And that's an important thing that I want to foster in my children, because I firmly believe that everyone can greatly benefit from seeing their country from outside looking in. And I want to provide that perspective for my kids. I want them to learn about other cultures in a natural way, as opposed to just from a book. Yeah. And you don't have to spend a lot of money to do it. Yes, airfare is crazy right now. I get it. I am feeling it. But you could, we went and dug for amethyst in Canada. It's not a huge cultural shift, but it's just something new. Talking about it, planning something a couple of years in advance and getting your kids pumped about it. And, my kids came back from Costa Rica counting in Spanish and practicing things that it is such an important part of my life that I want it to be part of theirs. And I think that it's one of the best gifts that you can give your kids is travel.
Yeah. No, I agree with you completely. I've been fortunate to travel with my teenage son last couple summers on his summer break. First summer we did Latin America, Guatemala, Belize, Mexico. And then this past summer was Southeast Asia for 2 months. And the opportunities are just so cool. And it's fun to watch him reflect. For some reason, it's really fun to watch him reflect when he gets back to the States. So for example, this fall he started back to school, and he's like, Dad, there's a kid here from Guatemala, in my class. And he was all excited that there was this kid from Guatemala in his class because he felt this connection because he had visited, he'd been to Guatemala. There's a game called GeoGuessr. Are you familiar with GeoGuessr?
Yes, I know GeoGuessr.
Anybody that's listening to this, it's one of my favorites, and it's been a lot of fun to share with my son. And maybe you shared it with your kids as well.
I haven't yet.
So GeoGuessr is this
Yes.
great game. If anybody game, I'm not sure, but anybody listening to
Yeah.
this, it's worth checking out. Where, for our listeners, basically the program drops you on a random spot using Google Street View, I guess. Just drops you in a random spot somewhere in the world, and you get to kind of move your way down the road, look at signs, look at clues, and trying to figure out where you're at. And my son is totally addicted to this. And he was at school, playing at school, and he sent me a message, and he's like, Dad, look where they dropped me. And he sent me a screenshot, and it was right in front of Pedaling Street in Kuala Lumpur, where he had been, a couple months
Nice.
earlier. He's like, Dad, they dropped me right in the spot right there. I stood in that spot. And he was so excited about that. And he was sharing it with all his friends at school. And and it opened up these conversations about things. And it's so much fun to watch him get excited about the places he's been and the things he's done.
Yes.
And yeah, it's been an icebreaker for him. He's sometimes socially awkward at school, and sometimes these conversations come up about places he has been, and it's just fun for him. He gets excited about it, and to see him able to engage and be more sensitive to other people,
Mm.
because there's a reality when you're sitting on the subway in Bangkok or whatever, and two white guys that are about 6 foot tall, we kind of stick out a little bit. And for him to just kind of appreciate and understand the different cultures and different things, and eating the street food, like going out
Yes.
and just having an amazing meal for like $2.50, and and sharing that with the staff and the people that are excited to talk to us. And it's just been so much fun. And I'm so happy that he's been able to see that. And you're going to see that as your kids get older too.
Oh, I love it. I mean, I think one of the important learning aspects of it, and I mean, my husband and I are both teachers. Like I studied education as well as art, and I and teaching in Japanese or in Japan as well. But watching it from that perspective of having them move out of their comfortable, culturally dominant place of living and be a minority, so important because am I ever going to understand what it's like to be a minority in my own country? No. Am I going to just get a little glimpse of what it may feel like? Yes. And that is so much stronger and more impactful than, like I said, than reading a book. It's to be able to feel that and be like, okay, I'm an outsider here, but these are the good things, these are the bad things. And just you learn so much. It's just amazing.
And it
And
doesn't stop
yeah.
as you get older, right? I mean,
Mhm.
this was my first trip to Southeast Asia just this past year, and I spent about a total of 6 months there. And actually, honestly, one of the biggest takeaways for me was when I was in Malaysia. I spent a good month and a half, a good chunk of that with Jackson. And Malaysia's the first Islamic country really that I'd been to. I'd been to Indonesia right before that, but I was on Bali, and it was a lot of exposure to
Mm.
the Hindu faith. But in Malaysia, you know, people dress differently, different customs, different traditions, different beliefs. And what I noticed was, you know, these families walking down the street with their kids and holding their hand and hugging them and picking them up and carrying them around the mall. And it was like, yeah, okay, these people they love their kids just as much as we do. They were very, very gracious. I've got, pictures of where Jackson and I were invited to family get-togethers for religious holidays, and the people. It just really opened my eyes to, we're not all that different. And I've traveled a lot of other places, and I've had that experience,
Mm.
but for some reason, that trip to Malaysia just kind of really drove the point home that it was a lot of fun. So I think it's super important to share that with our kids and do
Yes,
it
I think
ourselves.
being a parent, they say, you get to discover the world through your children's eyes.
Mm.
And it's even more so when you're traveling, honestly. I'm so excited to let them go to Japan with us and show them all these places, and they've got all these plans, and they're so excited. Even the bad experiences too, but like bad. We were in Costa Rica and we had an evening rainforest walk and like photography walk planned, and it started pouring. And I'm talking like we were going up a mountain, and the guide's like, we should probably head back because we're going to get struck by lightning. So we're heading back. And we had gotten them ponchos, and we were sort of dry, and we're looking at tarantulas and frogs and all kinds of stuff and scorpions. And we saw this toucan that was sleeping, which was not really that exciting because you can't really tell it's a toucan. It's like this. And he'd seen an awake toucan already. So he was just like, Mom, can we go back now? Can we go back now? Oh, I wish we hadn't done this. And, miserable 7-year-old. Normal reaction. He was wet and tired. But then I was reading one of his papers that he had written at school, and they're working on sentences. And he said he wants to go to the jungle to discover a sleeping toucan. And I'm like, oh, he remembers, and it's a positive memory. And that's kind of what I take away too, is even some of my favorite stories about travel are, at the time, I was miserable, or like a mistake I made or something. And then later it makes a fun story.
It's interesting how that works. I've had a few experiences like that as well. I mean, I got robbed in Mexico, and it's like one of my fondest memories.
You're like, check.
Well, it cost me $60 or whatever. I had about $60 worth of pesos in my pocket, and the police officer was nice enough to stop me and liberate me from my money. And I was like, okay, I spent $60 for an interesting story, and I'm not sharing that to scare anybody about doing things. The point is, things happen, when you put yourself outside your comfort zone. Sometimes there's surprises, and most of the time they end up being kind of fond memories. At the time I was like, ooh, that was weird. But after, like the day after, I was laughing about it. I was like, okay, fine.
Yeah, you got to roll with it.
It happens. So I want to discuss a little bit more about Japan, because that's a huge area that you work with, and I'd like to learn a little bit about some of the other areas, so our listeners are real clear on what it is you do for Global Basecamps, kind of what some of your favorite itineraries are, or some of the ones that you think that people might not, think about, because Japan's a lot more than just Tokyo and sushi. So
which are both great things.
Which are both amazing, great things. And actually, Jackson and I, we on our way back to the States from Bangkok, he insisted. He's like, Dad, I really, really want to go to Japan. So we booked like a 12-hour layover in Japan. So we got to the airport and hopped on the train, fell asleep on the train on the way into the city, and woke up and walked around and had lunch and had our, few hour Tokyo experience. That was pretty cool, but it sure left me wanting to go back. So what did I miss? Tell me a few things that we missed. And I know there's a lot.
Well, Japan is comprised of 47 prefectures. So it's tough. I mean, Japan has something for everybody, which is the key. Everything from history dating back to its isolationism and opening to trade down in Nagasaki, to the bombing, to post-war kawaii. There's massive youth culture interest with anime and manga, and I like it too, and gaming, and there's fashion, there's such beautiful art, which is my initial connection to Japan, was through the art world, and music, wine. The thing with Japan is that the Japanese are incredibly devoted to their hobbies and interests. So they very much identify with this. And this is not everybody, granted, I mean, individuals still, but from my experience working in high school, I worked at a sports school. And so my kids some of them would come and stay in dormitories, and they would play soccer or baseball, were the primary ones. But they would practice from like after school until midnight some nights, or 10 p.m. And they were just, basketball is my life, baseball is my life, soccer is my life. I had people who were like jazz focused, or ikebana, flower arranging, or tea ceremony, or whatever it was. They devoted tons of time and energy into what their passions were. I've met hikers, I've met gardeners, cooks, people just really hone in on it. And you see that in Japanese culture with like restaurants that open up and specialize in one very specific type of food, because you have to study for years as an apprentice to learn how to make the tempura exactly the right way. So it's this crisp bite, and it is just passion and honing in and things being passed down through generations. And it's just created such a variety in the culture as well. Um, the amount of pride and love that goes into products that are made, from tofu to samurai swords, is astounding.
Wow, Laura, I'm
And
curious because there's a bit of a stereotype that Japanese children have tremendous familial pressure to exceed in something. So there's this kind of idea comes maybe from the parents, like you will be a this, you will be a that, and they push to get their kids to do it. But I'm curious what your thoughts are, like the
um,
cause and effect. Is this generational? You mentioned generational. Is this generational pressure being handed down? Or do these kids that go in and practice soccer until midnight do it because they really are just passionate about it? What do you think it is that creates that kind of intensity?
So I think there's a little bit of a crossover there between South Asian and East Asian Chinese culture that might be being confused with Japanese culture, because you do have like the Chinese and the South Asian, you need to become a doctor or a lawyer.
Mhm.
Like, don't you dare get a B. Or yeah, my friend's parents were like, it's your blonde friends you're hanging out with. That's why you got a B. Um, so Japan doesn't quite have it to that extent. And I think part of that was because of the war. It kind of broke some of that traditional pushing down. I think there's a little bit more desire for creativity and things. In Japan, there is definitely you need to respect your elders. You need to continue the line of this art or this skill. And so you will see 9 generations of people creating this particular craft, or making a particular product. And there is pressure there, to the point that there was like a special type of adoption process that could take place. If you didn't have a child to carry on, you could adopt someone and like train them, and they would be part of your family. And there's also part of that with last names. Like, it's becoming a little bit more common for the man to take the woman's last name if there's no male in their family, so that the family name continues. And so there is pressure there, but I feel like nowadays there's a lot more freedom for the Japanese students to decide what they want to do on their own. What you see is, as babies and up until about the age of 6 or so, kids are doted on, and they have a lot of freedom in Japan. They are to the point of almost being spoiled. They're not bad, spoiled kids, but they get a lot of love and attention, and like, oh, you do what you want to do, yay! And then the schools, starting around Shogatsu, which is elementary, start kind of upping the militaristic aspects that came about over the past century or so. And that's why they have the uniforms the way you have them. And the little kids, when they graduate from kindergarten, walk like this, and it's super cute. And they take their corner and they keep walking. So it's all very organized in that way. And then as you get up into high school, it's still very organized, and there's a lot of pressure for getting into a good school. So it's not what you're going to do and study sometimes. It's just, in order to get past the exams, you have to push yourself. And if you're not smart, then maybe you're really good at this craft or this, and we'll put our energy behind you there. But I've never seen a big push from the parents in my experience. And again, my school wasn't exactly like a super academic school, so I can't say for sure. But college, university in Japan, unless you go to a very high level, like Tokyo University level school, college is considered party time for a lot of students, because the pressure's been so great up until then that college is to let off steam and maybe find a partner. And Yeah, it's very different, I would say. I mean, yeah, you party here too, but it's it's known for that in Japan, by the Japanese, where if you go to a regular university, you're probably just going to relax and yeah, take some classes. Yeah, but if you're at Tokyo University or if you want to be a doctor or something else, then it's still
Right,
tough.
right.
So,
Something when you were sharing that, something came up for me that I'd love to touch on. I
mhm.
remember I actually had a girlfriend. She was an exchange student from Japan in college. It was in Wyoming, Central Wyoming College. This girl from Japan ended up in the middle of Wyoming, and the biggest athletic program at the school was rodeo. So you,
A natural
what an
connection with Japan.
what an interesting fit. And so of course I was intrigued because she was definitely different than the other girls there. And anyway, I remember, very smart, very, very smart young lady. And the topic of conflict between the United States and Japan during World War II came up.
Mhm.
And it became fairly clear. We had to use her dictionary to really have a conversation because maybe that's why they sent her to middle of Wyoming because she didn't do well on her.
Oh,
But
yeah.
anyway, the story she conveyed to me, or the insight that she shared with me, was that she was very aware of the bombings, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, had no concept of Pearl Harbor or no concept of how the war started. Her only real recollection from her education, anyway, was that World War II was all about two bombs that were dropped on Japan. Horrific event. Absolutely. I get it.
Mhm.
I can understand why someone growing up in Japan would be heavily focused on that because that was a huge thing, huge event. And I remember just thinking, maybe a lot of governments, a lot of cultures kind of educate for a particular reason. Did you experience that in Japan, or have you had experiences with that in Japan where maybe the education system is I mean, it's definitely like that here in the US, where
Yeah, I
it's like,
mean,
okay, this is the story, this is how we're writing our history books, or is it just me being just kind of obviously that's what they're going to write about in their history books, and I grew up in the States, so I heard my history. What are your
um,
thoughts?
well, my husband's a history teacher,
Okay.
so just put that on. He'd be ashamed of me if I do this wrong, so I'm deep breath. Uh, so I didn't teach history in Japan, so that's one thing. I can't really speak to that too much. I can tell you that they are there is a generational divide about guilt and accepting responsibility and things. And I believe that the older generation is very aware of what happened. I spoke to some of my favorite people to speak to in Japan, and some of my good friends are older Japanese, like in their 70s and 80s, and they're sheer delight. And they know that I am of a different generation, and they know I didn't drop the bombs. They know that I had nothing to do with it, and they got to know me as a person. And I only had one person that I ran into who treated me badly. And it was an old drunk man in the middle of the night at a train station who was just like, foreigner. And I answered him in Japanese, and I'm like, what? Just wait for the train, man. But no, no one ever, like, there was no guilt, or no one ever made me feel bad about it. I went to Hiroshima, I went to Nagasaki, I've been to the museums. Overwhelming, incredibly powerful. I think everyone should go at some point in their lives. But I think the way Japan kind of focuses on it right now is they're trying to put their energy toward looking forward. And so it's not that they don't know what happened, they just don't go into the deeper aspects of why Japan was siding with the Axis forces, and like what was going on, and why Japan wanted to expand into China and Manchuria and all of these things. And it's a fascinating time in history. And those of you who are not aware of it, I highly recommend digging into it. The U.S. did some messed up stuff historically. We lots of coups in our past that we were responsible for. Japan did some really, really dark stuff too. I think every country's history has darkness and badness. And I think that they're trying to distance themselves from it because they realize, I think a lot of people kind of took the bombing as okay, this is punishment of some sort for what we have done in the past as a nation, and let's move past it. And I don't think that that's what everyone thinks, and I don't think it was required as a punishment per se, like anything along those lines. But um, they kind of don't want to talk about it. It's like, if you did something really crappy back in the day, you don't really want to think about it. Like that thing that wakes you up in the middle of the night and you're like, oh, I did that. That's, oh. But I think that it is there and it is available for them to learn about. It's not that it's hidden. It's just that's like the next layer of history. Because I would say most Americans don't really know much beyond Pearl Harbor happened, we bombed Japan.
No, you're right.
Like, so I think that Japan very much, especially the younger generations, don't have that deeper history. They don't know about the country kind of being controlled by the government and by the emperor, who they thought was God. And I mean, there's just so much wrapped up in religion, and it was like a cult to a point. And it's hard to look back and be like, wow, this is my history, you know? And they choose to look forward and say, these things have happened to us, but we also have this really proud history of, all of these years prior to that Japan was amazing and has so much to offer with art and culture and everything else. And I think it's just more of a let's just not really focus on that as opposed to ignoring it. So
that makes a lot of sense.
I think that would be the
I appreciate that insight. And as you were speaking about that, it occurs to me, the German people have a very similar approach.
Yes.
Colombia, I spent an awful lot of time in Colombia, and there's things that have happened down there in the past that they don't really want somebody like me to show up and ask them a bunch of questions about Pablo Escobar, or, there's
talk about his hippos. That's always safe.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many other cool things to experience.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing though is what does travel do for that? What is, our conversation is about travel and learning cultures and expanding horizons and introducing my son to Asia, your children to Asia, to just different cultures and different people. And that's something that wasn't really happening back in the, 20s, the 30s. The most Americans that were alive in the 40s, their first trip overseas was to go fight, and now we're having conversations about our kids going to meet other people and to learn cultures and to learn languages and all these special things. And that's pretty cool. And in fact, interestingly that we're speaking about this topic. When I was in Guatemala with my son the summer before last, we stayed at a little hotel on Lake Atitlan, and the guy who owned the hotel was Japanese and didn't speak any English. And I'm working on my Spanish, and we actually and he's about my age. Come to learn that he grew up in Hiroshima. So a Japanese guy from Hiroshima, American guy from the U.S., meeting in Guatemala. And we sat down and had this as deep of a conversation as you could have with my limited Spanish, but it was pretty good. And he pulled out the photo albums, showed me pictures of his kid who's off in military school in Guatemala. And we talked about his childhood in Japan and his experiences in Latin America. And it was just such a cool thing to be able to experience that, just the way that all kind of came together. And I'm just sharing that because I just think it's super cool that when we travel and I guess where I'm going with this is the language part, right? Because had I not made the effort to learn some Spanish as I was traveling, I wouldn't have had a conversation. He would have been some Japanese looking guy in a hotel in Guatemala that I never would have connected with.
Right. End of story.
Right, end of story. And your language teacher, and learn Japanese in Japan. So I'd love to just hear your thoughts and insights about the importance of learning languages.
Yes. Languages are scary. I think for people who only speak English, there is very much a wall. I refer to it as the wall, that it feels like you just can't get over it because you can't see over it. You don't know what's on the other side. And you know people who are fluent in two languages. And for me, it was growing up in St. Louis, didn't really know anybody who was fluent in two languages. And then all of a sudden I realized, oh, my friend's parents are Chinese. I wonder if they speak Mandarin at home. And I started kind of seeing, oh, they're from Gujarat. I wonder what they speak. Oh. And I realized that some people who were raised with parents who are first generation or who come over from these other countries could speak these other languages. And I was so jealous. But I think nowadays they're starting to open up more and have kids learn at an earlier age, which is wonderful. I kind of use Japanese around my kids, and we try to my little one has picked up katakana and hiragana already, and he's kind of using those. But I think that it's so key to understanding just the world, because it's like, the colors in the rainbow, Roy G. Biv, right? But what happens when you learn that there's yellow, orange, or turquoise, or silver, or oh my God, it's like your palette becomes that much bigger. And it's not just like the words, but the way that the words are strung together, like finding out that there are phrases in these other languages that just make perfect sense. And they say something or a feeling that you didn't know there were words for. And you can get access to poetry and music, and you start to understand aspects of like their seasons and the way that they perceive food and so many things. And then you start realizing, oh, well, we borrow words from these other languages, so we already have access to a lot of these other languages. And English is a bear. English, having taught English for years, it's a tough language to learn because we have so many borrowed words and so much slang, and oh my God, it's terrifying. And then I see that it's one of the most commonly spoken second languages around the world, and I am just in awe of everyone who's trying to learn English. It's so hard. I'm incredibly impressed. Um, so I think that that wall exists, and you go into school and you learn your like uno dos tres and all of that, and then you don't really push past it because Mrs. Marconi, my Spanish teacher, didn't exactly sit us down and have a conversation about life and the world, and so you're stuck just repeating stuff, and it doesn't have that connection. So I really love. I want my husband to work on this at his high school that he's teaching at, but I love promoting classes going abroad and being put into those situations. And being in France and having to order at a restaurant is a completely different experience than sitting in class, with my Japanese students saying, okay, we're going to run a store. And they're like, no, price down. It doesn't work like that. So I think having those real world experiences, it opens doors. And we talked before a little bit, like I have used my Japanese in bizarre places, in like the bathrooms at the Grand Canyon. I ran into a Japanese mom and her daughter's like, oh my God, you understood me. In Sri Lanka, in Myanmar, when I was in Costa Rica, I was helping our guides learn more Japanese to work with their clients. Like language, no matter what language it is, you will use it. You will make connections, and just it opens these synapses in your brain. And I'm not saying I'm fluent in Japanese. Like I lost a lot when I left because you don't use it regularly, but my God, like the doors that have opened from studying Spanish or Italian or Japanese or Sanskrit, even when I was studying yoga, there's so much out there.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I would never want to discourage someone from traveling because they don't have a language. So let's say Colombia is a good example. There's not a lot of English speakers there. Would I recommend it to somebody that doesn't speak Spanish? Yes, of course. Absolutely. Go. You'll figure it out. Just hand and arm signals and facial expressions. Eventually you'll get there. Maybe you want to have a little better plan in place. Like you don't want to be looking for a place to sleep if you don't speak Spanish, but at the same time, when you do speak some Spanish, or even when you make an effort to speak some Spanish, it opens up, like you said, doors. So let's say, for example, I only have 10 words of Spanish. Well, let's say I don't have anything. I walk into a tienda in Colombia and I have no Spanish, and I'm just like, Coca-Cola, and I hold my hand out with a bunch of money in my hands, whatever, they can pick through it and, whatever. That's one
Yeah.
approach. But what I found, and the person working there will be like, I don't speak English. He clearly doesn't speak Spanish. We're just going to figure this out. When you walk in with 10 words of Spanish, all of a sudden now this person is willing to share their 10 words of English that
Mm-hmm.
you didn't, I don't speak English, but all of a sudden when you start to try and speak some Spanish, I believe it gives them permission to try their English, because otherwise they're
Yeah.
intimidated. They don't want to carry the whole conversation. If you don't speak any Spanish, they're probably not likely to try very hard to speak English. They're just going to look at you. But when you make an effort and your Spanish sucks, then they're like, okay, his Spanish sucks, so I'm not going to be embarrassed that my English sucks. So I'm going to go ahead and try. So you get so much further. But more than that, it's like the connection as human beings. You're both in the same boat. You're both making an effort to communicate. And when you have two people making an effort to communicate, guess what you have? Connection, right?
It's an exchange of humility.
Yes, it
right?
is.
And that's the wall. I found studying Japanese was the one language that I studied more than anything else. And I had a sensei who, Yamashita Sensei, shout out. We called her the Dragon Lady because she would whip like kanji stroke order and grammar into your head. But she would dumb down her speaking to your level and kind of move up with you. And I was terrified of making mistakes because she was so grammar oriented. So then I got another sensei who I just sat and talked to.
Mm-hmm.
And that took me a couple of weeks to just get comfortable with that humility. And I know that he was a language lover. He was studying Portuguese at the time and talking about how he was trying to learn that and the mistakes he was making. And it makes you more comfortable. And so my ability to speak with that and befriending his son who didn't speak a lick of English, he and I would just bounce off each other and be like, ha, 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 we're dumb. And that is what gets you over that wall, because that wall feels like you can never get beyond it. It feels like that is the native speaker wall. And you don't really have to be a native speaker. You just have to kind of get to the top and be like, oh, okay, I see. It's just communication over there. That's it.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be so incredibly terrifying. And it's just, it's fun when you're able to have those kind of those casual conversations that, there's no pressure. Like as I'm working on having a conversation in Spanish, all of a sudden I start to hear these English words coming back from the other side. And before long, there's a moment of like, creo tu inglés es mejor que mi español, and I'm saying, I think your English is better than my Spanish. And they get all tickled. And it's just like this fun thing. And it's like, no, your Spanish is better. No, your English is better. And then it's just like we're both in the same boat. We're sharing an experience. And shared experiences are what, that's connection. That's what it's all about. So I just always encourage people, don't just try and memorize some words just to memorize some words. Like, just, I don't know, spend a little time. There's apps on our phone. It's so easy now.
Yeah, it's Google so easy now.
You're like, you want to say, I would like a Coca-Cola. You can pull out your phone, put that into Google Translate. It'll give you the words and make an effort to use the words. And eventually you start to pick up on it. And people just want to connect with you when you show up.
They do.
Trying to, communicate with them.
And can I note that one thing I found really made a huge difference was having a common interest. So my friend Kazuto, who my cat is named after, he and I became friends because I was taking classes with his father, but we started snowboarding together. And that bonded us because we started talking about it and just having conversation. Another one of my friends, we started gardening together. She had this massive spread and we'd trade seeds and I'd order things from the US and give her recipes. And just having things that you have in common. If it's dancing is a huge one. I randomly just started swing dancing with some guy in like a club one time because he's like, you dance? And I'm like, yes. And we had a blast. And I mean, you don't have to speak to connect. It can be so many different things, like play a game of volleyball with somebody, basketball. Those are the ways that I saw people developing friendships when they were traveling or living abroad.
Yep.
And if you have something in common, you don't have to speak, but then the words will eventually start coming.
Yeah. And people are, when you show an interest in something they're interested in, they naturally open up. I've found one of my favorite things to do is in a restaurant is to try and have some sort of conversation with the server about what they like.
Yes.
You're like, okay, I can read Spanish. So you give me a menu in Spanish. I can sit there and read it. And I can get a pretty good idea what everything's on there. But why would I want to when I can just, ¿cuál es tu favorita? What is your favorite? Or dame una recomendación, por favor. Give me a recommendation. And their eyes just light up. And this is in English too. I mean, this could be anywhere, right? You just ask somebody, what do they like? And then they get excited and they want, oh yeah, I really like this one. And then they bring it to you and then they'll come back and check on you. How was it?
They'll watch you.
Yeah. They're like, oh, do you like it? And you can just light up and like, oh, it's maravillosa or whatever. And that creates a connection there. And
yes.
You'll try things that you otherwise probably wouldn't eat. I mean, when I was in Bali, one of those things where I looked down the street and it looked like there were a bunch of people down there. So I went down there and there were some food carts and there was this young lady getting some food from, I guess, one of the warungs. I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing it right, but she's picking out stuff and I have no idea what I'm looking at. And I'm just like, can you help me? I want to eat whatever you're eating. And she's like, really? I'm like, yeah, whatever you're eating. So she helped me order. We got 2 identical plates, and I paid for hers. And I said, you're my guide. So there's a guide fee.
Oh,
and
nice.
She's like, oh, can I take a picture with you? So she pulled out her phone and handed it to her sister so we could get a picture, I guess I don't know where it showed up, and then I'm like, well, I need a picture too, right? So we got a picture and it was really cool because I took a selfie with her standing next to me. And in the selfie later on, I could see she was holding her phone and I could see the picture that her sister had just taken of us on her phone as we're doing the selfie. And it was like, such a cool experience. So just asking people for help and suggestions. There's so many cool things that you can do when you travel. So I think
it's unending.
Yeah,
it's endless.
Laura, we talked about a lot of things, and I have a feeling we could probably do a bunch more episodes about a bunch more things. I don't know if we really touched on all the places that you do, that you specialize with Global Basecamp. So I want to ask you, what questions should I have asked, or what have I forgotten to ask, or what would you like to make sure that our listeners know about you, Global Basecamps, or just anything in general?
I would say that, I focus on Asia primarily, but we do work in a lot of different destinations. I would say the key points are plan your travel, but leave time. Travel with your family because it's only going to do good. And I think if you have questions, there's no bad question when it comes to travel. And I think especially when it comes to traveling with your family, if it feels like something you want to try and do, reach out and ask, reach out and talk about destinations. I find more people are relieved to find out they can continue to travel because it is something that they, like you said, they give up. And a lot of people feel that their lives have to completely change when they become parents, but you don't want to lose yourself. And if traveling is a part of you and a part of your personality and your life, keep it and share it with your kids. You want your children to be proud of you and who you are and be interested in you. And, I might be boring mom most of the year, but then I could be exciting mom who gets to take you to the kaiten sushi place and fill you up on random raw fish. There are so many opportunities out there that if you have a chance, just take them. And I think that hesitance is what's holding so many people back.
Yes.
Or maybe they're using their kids as an excuse. Ooh, maybe.
Well, I guess a fairly related topic is if you're single right now listening to this and you're pursuing to change that, or you want a partner in your life, if travel is important to you, I would strongly suggest that you, first of all, take advantage of the opportunity maybe to travel while you're single, but more importantly, is take that into account when you're looking for a partner, for a life partner. So anybody that's younger listening to this, if travel is important to you, if you feel like it's part of your identity, avoid relationship advice, but maybe
Throw it out there.
maybe take a trip. Go do
Yes.
something with your potential partner before you decide, okay, this is the one. Because speaking from experience, it can be challenging when your passion and energy is all about travel. And then you meet somebody, you get married and you have kids. It's really hard to take the kids traveling when your partner doesn't want to travel either.
Yeah.
Then,
And I would put that a step further and say, I know so many of my friends met their partner abroad or met their partner traveling. Go and do what you're passionate about doing.
Yeah.
If that's traveling, if that's kayaking, whatever it is. And I've met so many of my friends that way. And my partner, I met him abroad.
it is interesting because it's pretty easy for us to get our head around. Like, well, if I like to bowl, if bowling is my thing and I want to meet somebody, the bowls, I'm going to go to a bowling alley, right? If I'm into religion and church and I want to meet a religious person, I probably want to go to church to meet that religious person. So if you want to find somebody to travel with, guess what? The best place to meet people that like to travel is traveling. So, which is basically what you just said. So,
and if you don't meet a life partner, maybe you're going to meet a lifelong friend.
Yeah, friends, connections, just enrichment.
Or excuses to travel, to go visit them.
Yeah, you just go travel, do the stuff you enjoy. If you do meet somebody that's a good match, you're likely to meet them somewhere where they're traveling as well, and it increases the chances of you both enjoying that thing, or skiing or snowboarding.
It's a great big world. Right? Make it smaller.
Yeah. On that note, yes, it is a great big world. Let's make it a little bit smaller. So thank you so much. Laura, is there anything else you want to throw out there before we wrap up?
My little one is saying, wrap it up,
yes.
Mom. I would just say, if you have any hesitation, ask a travel expert because they've probably been through it. Yeah. And, if we work in so many different destinations, there's a correct place or a great place for every time of year. But also, even if you show up somewhere and it is the smoky season and, there are all these things that are negative, there are going to be positives. There's no bad time to go anywhere. You can always have a cool experience no matter where you are, especially if you have an open mind.
I love that. And we're going to have a link to Global Basecamps here in the show notes so they can reach out to you guys and connect. And I think some people, if they haven't traveled a lot, they might be a little intimidated to speak with someone like yourself. Hopefully after this conversation, they won't feel that way anymore. That's the idea.
Yes.
But I would just encourage people, just reach out. Like you said, there's no dumb questions. I'm happy you mentioned that. So let's get them connected with you and you can give them some advice. If you have a trip that's good for them, that's great. And if not, I trust that you'll point them in the right direction. So
will do. And we were all wide-eyed and curious and not knowing what we were doing at some point. And join us.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people that have life transitional changes at some point in their life and didn't have the opportunity to travel before. And maybe they need to get hooked up with a group trip or maybe not. I don't know, but I just encourage them to reach out. So Laura, thank you so much for taking time, and I'll let you go back and hang out with your sick kids.
Oh my gosh, thanks.
Those of you that are listening to it and don't see the video here, I've seen both of her kids now on this call. They're super cute. And Laura, thank you so much for taking time away from them and sharing your stories. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
I trust you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed recording it. If you're enjoying the Big World Made Small podcast, please take a moment to tell the algorithm by subscribing and posting a review so that others can benefit as well. I also invite you to take a quick trip over to bigworldmadesmall.com and join our private adventure travel community to receive new episode notifications, special access to our guest experts, and perhaps even some exclusive partner offers that we haven't discussed on the podcast. I'll publish another episode soon. Until then, keep exploring. It's the best way to make a big world feel just a bit smaller.